Thank you. So welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg Postgraduate School. This is an information session for STATKON and PFM. My name is Koketso Pila and I will be your moderator today. And please allow me to attend this session. And most importantly, I would like to thank our presenter, Dr. Richard, for his effort with preparing and giving this presentation. So before I officially introduce Dr. Richards to you, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and some important information. And so for the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand if you would like to speak, or you can type your question in the chat box. And the recording for this session will be uploaded on our Moodle community as well as the presentation slides. And also a feedback survey will be sent out during the session on the chat box. Please may we kindly ask that you complete the feedback survey for us to get records of your attendance so that you may receive the certificates and also to give some nice words to our facilitators. And so I will now introduce to you our facilitator by reading out his bio. So Dr. Richard Davey is the Director of the Statistical Consultation Services Postgraduate School at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He completed his PhD in Development Policy and Management through the University of Manchester in 2015. Prior to this, he completed master's degree in Development Studies, University of KwaZulu-Natal and then University of Natal. He used either survey or experiment-based research designs for these qualifications. And in the role of statistical consultant, Dr. Richard provides quantitative research design and statistical analysis support for UJ staff and postgraduate students. Prior to moving to UJ, he worked on numerous survey-based research projects, taught research methods, and supervised postgraduate students in the School of Development Studies, UKZN, Durban. Without wasting any more time, I would like to hand over to Dr. Richard. Over to you, Dr. Richard.
Thanks very much, Koketso. I'm going to put my slide on screen quickly. I hope it works. So, are my slides showing?
Sure.
Is it showing?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I can't see it on my side. Must really investigate that. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. The session is split into two sections. One is talking about the role of STATKON supporting postgrad students. And then the second part is the funding group. And I'm sure some of you are probably more interested in the second part. But they've put me first, so you're going to have to listen to me. Okay, so the STATKON is basically a unit within the postgrad school, which provides support for researchers, postgrad students who are doing quantitative research. So if you're doing a research project, if you're a PhD or a master's, or even possibly an honors student who's doing a quantitative-based project, you can get support from STATKON for your research project. And I'm going to go through in the session, I'm going to go through the phases where we can support you. We don't support every phase of your research process or of your research journey, but we do support a number of phases. Okay, this is only, we don't provide the same service for qualitative research. We're a group of statisticians who help with quantitative projects, or if you're doing a mixed methods with a quantitative component. If you're doing qualitative research, we don't have a sort of equivalent of the statistical consultation service at UJ. So you need to get support from another source for your qualitative project. Okay, so, but if you've chosen to do a quantitative or mixed methods research design, when you start the process, you're going to have to come up with an idea for your project. And that's going to be, you're going to have to come up with a research topic, a research problem that you want to investigate, and you're going to have to write a research proposal. So we're not involved in that early phase of deciding on the research problem. You'll be, when you're doing that phase, you'll be talking to your supervisor about what possible projects you might be able to do. You might have an idea of your own, which you then take to your supervisor. So there's different kind of pathways of coming up with a problem. And then the outcome of that process will be a research proposal, which gets presented at a higher degrees committee, either in your faculty or in a department, in whichever department you're working in. So different faculties might have slightly different processes. So that's kind of your job and your supervisor's job to get to that point. And just one thing to say, when you're doing a quantitative study, quantitative research is normally associated with testing a theory. So you might have a theory about the relationship between two variables, and your research might be about testing that relationship to see if it works or doesn't work in the context that you're doing your research in. And I'm going to share with you a if you're planning on doing quantitative research. There's a very good chapter by an author called Wetton called Modeling Theoretical Propositions, where he explains what a theoretical proposition is. And also, particularly if you're doing a PhD or a research master's, if you want to contribute to the theoretical debate going on in the area that you're working in, he has suggestions for how you can sort of come up with a new theory for your research. So I'm going to share that paper with you after the session. If you're doing a quantitative project and you're going to be testing a theory, have a look at that paper. Okay, it's just a useful resource that I think is very useful to have access to if you're doing quantitative research. Okay, another resource that I'm going to share with you is a very short paper by Saunders and Tozzi, which is what they do is they use an analogy of an onion for the layers of research design. So when you develop your proposal, you're going to have to come up with a methodological choice, and a strategy, and different tools for collecting data, and also a method of analysis. And this research onion, kind of talks about those different layers. So if you look at the second layer, that's about methodological choice, and there's quantitative designs, there's qualitative designs, and there's mixed methods designs. If you look at that sort of second outer layer of the onion. And then within that, you might do a survey or an experimental design or case study or grounded theory as your strategy. So I'm also going to share this very short paper with you. It's very useful to have this as a structure for when you are writing your research proposal. So sometimes you might need to talk about the research philosophy, which is driving your research design. Then at the next level, you would need to sort of say which methodological choice you're choosing. Is it going to be a quantitative project? Is it going to be a qualitative project? That kind of decision making, and then what kind of strategy you're going to be using. So when you're developing your research design, you need to think about each one of these layers and what you're going to, which methodology you're going to use within those layers. Okay, and the result of all of this, you deciding on a problem and deciding on what research approach is the best to use for your project, you'll end up with a proposal, and that's where we come in to provide some support. So once you've got your proposal, and if you're going to be using, say, for example, a questionnaire as part of your data collection instrument, that would be, if I go back, the questionnaire would be under data collection and data analysis, which is the inner layer of the onion. That's the questionnaire is a data collection tool. If you're using a questionnaire, you can come to STATKON to book what we call a research design appointment with one of the STATKON consultants. And that your proposal must have been approved by your supervisor and or by the departmental research committee that looks at research proposals before they give you permission to kind of go into the field to do your research. So essentially what we're doing here is we're providing a sort of third reviewer for your proposal. So you will have written your proposal and you'll be evaluating it. Your supervisor will be evaluating it. And then we come in with a sort of specialist kind of view of statistics. And we look at the proposal in terms of the analysis plan for your project. Okay. So what we do is we review your research proposal, and if you're using a questionnaire, the questionnaire, or if you're using some other form of data collection tool, we'll look at that data collection tool that you're going to be using. It might be an observation sheet. It might be some kind of documents that you want to use. It might be patient records that you're going to be using for your study. So we look at the research questions that you're asking. We'll look at how you're defining and operationalizing the constructs for your study. Those are the variables that you're going to be measuring. We'll look at the research definitions. I need to move this research strategy that you want to be using. We'll look at the definition of the population and sampling that you're going to be using and the design of the data collection instrument. And we also look at the analysis plan, the statistical analysis that you're planning to do for your project. Quite often if you haven't had much experience in doing statistical analysis, you might not have a very good description of the statistical analysis that needs to be done in your proposal. So we would look at that and we would give you input and explain what kind of analysis will be possible with your questionnaire if you're using it, or with the variables that you're measuring. We'll also look at definitions, the concepts that you're using and the definitions, and make a comment on that. If we feel that the concepts are not clearly defined or if they're not clearly measured, we will give feedback on that as well. So it just gives you another review of your work, and usually we have some quite good input to make on the quality of the work that you're doing. And it's always good to get another opinion on your work that you're doing. Okay, so the research design appointments you have to book to get an appointment, and then you can usually get into when you're planning your research, you need to build in time for activities that you might not have anticipated having to do. So, for example, having a meeting with a STATKON consultant might be something that you haven't thought about doing for your research. So you need to build in time for such a meeting. And we don't, because we are a small group and we are catering for the entire university, all the postgrads in the UJ and the staff in UJ, we have a very busy calendar. So you need to anticipate that it could be a week or 2 weeks before you would be able to get an appointment. So what you shouldn't do is expect to phone that day and get an appointment with a consultant. It's very unlikely that there would be a consultant available on the same day or a day or two after you've contacted STATKON. It does depend on the availability of the consultants, but we are dealing with a lot of projects, so we are busy. So, and we also recommend for that first meeting that your supervisor attends that first research design meeting. And the reason for that is just so that everybody's on the same page in terms of design and so on. It's not compulsory, but it's usually a good idea if your supervisor can attend the meeting. Okay. We do meetings face-to-face, or we can do online meetings. So when you book with a consultant, you can ask to have an in-person meeting or a face-to-face or an online meeting, depending on what your preference is. And we normally facilitate meetings using Teams or Zoom. Okay, so that's the process. Once you've had the meeting, you'll get feedback from the consultant on your research proposal and on various aspects of your research proposal and on a questionnaire, if you're using a questionnaire, for example. And depending on the extent of the changes needed, we would either give you feedback and then advise you to get approval from your supervisor, and then once you've got that approval, you would be able to continue with field work. If there's a lot of corrections to be made, we might ask you to resubmit the proposal and the questionnaire for a second review by the STATKON consultant. And it's just so we just need to see that you've made the changes that we're recommending, or that what kind of changes you've decided to make based on the recommendations that we've made, because we don't want you going into the field and making bad decisions about measuring the wrong things, for example. Okay, so depending on the quality of your first submission, that will determine whether a second submission would be needed. And again, if you're planning your time, you need to build in time for that possibility that your proposal might be there might be a request for you to resubmit your proposal or your questionnaire. And just that can also happen with the committees that you go to. So when you submit your work to one of the faculty committees, they might say that you need to resubmit your work because there's something missing, or there's a gap, or there's a weakness with the proposal. So bear in mind that you need to build in time for that process. So some of you will be lucky that everything works out wonderfully. You've got a fantastic design, you've explained it clearly, everything works very smoothly. Others of you will be not so lucky because your proposal might get to an ethics committee where there's somebody who doesn't like something that you've said, or doesn't agree with something that you've said, and they will reject it for approval, and then you might need to resubmit for a second approval. So just bear that in mind, that it's that could be a long process. Okay, so another instrument that another resource that I'm going to share with you for research design is a chapter by Blakey called Sample Research Designs. And the reason why I share this chapter is because it's based on a social science example. But the reason why I share this chapter is because it's got a very clear sort of outline of the key important elements of a proposal. So there's research question, there's a description of the problem to be researched, there's research questions, there's a definition of the concepts of which are going to be measured in the study. There's an explanation of how the concepts are going to be operationalized. That means how we're going to measure them. There's an explanation of where the data is going to come from. There's an explanation of how the data is going to be collected. And then there's also an analysis plan linked to answering the research questions. So when you look at that chapter, think about how you would develop each component for your own research. And because the reason why I'm kind of giving you these resources is because often when we see proposals, there's often gaps or sort of weaknesses in the proposal. So, for example, the researcher might not have included an explanation of what's going to be measured in the study, and that's a huge kind of thing that's missing. If you're going to have a proposal, you have to say what's going to be measured in that proposal. So if there's nothing there about what's going to be measured, there's a real gap there. So and there might be So and proposals always have slightly different designs. Some disciplines include research questions, some disciplines don't. So you must also be guided by your discipline. But generally, proposals do have certain core elements that have to be included. And this chapter, I think, gives a good indication of the main things that should be included in a research proposal, so somebody who's reading it can understand what's going on. Okay. And then there's also different designs in the study, so in the chapter, so you can sort of see how you might do the kind of definitions for a quantitative study versus a mixed methods versus a qualitative study. So there's different designs that are presented in the first one is a quantitative design, which is what we focus on. And that would usually be the one that most of the students that I provide advice to, I would tell them just to look at the first example, because we are dealing with quantitative projects. Okay, another useful resource which I'll share with you is if you're developing a questionnaire for your research and you are going to be using what we call ordinal scales, which are questions where you have a rating of a particular issue. We have a handout that we use which measures different elements of rating. So you can measure frequency, you can measure quality, you can measure level of satisfaction, you can measure level of importance. You can measure lots of different sort of dimensions when you're using ordinal questions. So it's a useful tool to use if you're going to be using a questionnaire and you have to, if you're measuring people's attitudes, for example, we normally use an agreement scale for attitude measurement. If you want to know how well a company is doing on a particular process, you might want to measure quality, for example. So what the scale that you use will depend on what you're measuring. But this handout gives you different types of things you can measure using a scale question. Okay. Right. So then once your research proposal has been approved, you will receive permission to proceed with fieldwork. This happens within your department. So it's not, we don't make that decision at STATKON. We'll give you feedback on your proposal, and then at some point, your supervisor or your department will give you permission to go ahead with fieldwork. So usually after you've successfully got through the ethics committee and the department and the faculty. Okay, and so we don't get involved in data collection except for one particular area. So it's as the researcher, it's your responsibility to collect data for your research. One area where we do provide support is through offering an online survey service, and we use a program called Question Pro. But we do charge a fee for loading, editing, and monitoring the online survey. So that's one of our advice on research proposals and questionnaires is free. But we do charge for a small fee for loading and monitoring an online survey. And that's just because we need to cover the cost of the software. So the software is, we have to pay for the license, and we need to be able to fund that cost for the software. So that's the reason why we charge for that service. But you can also do your own online surveys if you want to collect data using an online survey. You can use Google Forms, and you can also use, I think Question Pro actually does have a free sort of usage, a limited free usage, and I think so does SurveyMonkey. So you could, but you must remember though that if you're using the free software, it won't have as many, it won't be as flexible or have as many options as you would if you were paying for a license. So when you're using something for free, usually you get part of what the application offers, not the whole application functionality. So some functions won't work if you're using a free version. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so and also I would also say be careful of using online surveys. A lot of people are using them these days, partly because of COVID, when we couldn't do face-to-face research. That's coming back more now, but online surveys, sometimes they work very well, sometimes they don't work very well. So it depends on your target audience, and it depends on how much influence you would have over convincing participants to respond. So if you are going to use something like an online survey, just be careful about how you're going to use it and whether it's the right technique to use for your study. Okay, and then the other way, when we move on to data capturing, so you might have collected your data and then you want to capture the data. Let's say, for example, you've used some hard copy questionnaires, or you have some patient records that you want to capture for your research project. We can assist in two ways. The first way is that if you want to capture the information yourself, we can explain to you how to do that. We explain how because when you want to analyze data, you have to get the data into a particular format in order to analyze it. And if you structure the data in the wrong way, there's different ways you can sort of input information. And so one of the common mistakes a researcher might make is that when they collect data, that instead of capturing the data as it is, they kind of count how many people have said yes to a question, and then they summarize that. So they summarize the data instead of capturing the raw data. And when you summarize data, you can't work with it in the same way as when you've got raw data. So you need to avoid making those kinds of data capturing mistakes. So we'll kind of explain to you what you need to do to get the data into a format that is where you can analyze it properly, and where we know it'll work for your analysis. The other alternative is if you don't want to do the data capturing yourself, you can make use of STATKON's data capture service. We have an in-house data capturer. So let's say, for example, you're working and you've got 1,000 questionnaires and you don't feel that you'll be able to capture them accurately on your own, then you can bring those to STATKON and we will capture those for you. The service is free, except if there's a lot of questionnaires or they're very long questionnaires and it's going to take us a long time to capture them. So UJ does subsidize some data capturing, but it's if there's we kind of subsidize based on the number of questionnaires and on the length of the questionnaire. And again, it's just the charge would be to cover the costs of having a data capturer capture the data. Okay, but it's not usually most projects are captured for free unless you have like 10,000 questionnaires or something like that, and it would need a lot of time to capture the data. Okay, and then sometimes if you've got a questionnaire or a data collection instrument where you've got written responses or word-based responses to questions, we don't code those responses for you. So it would be up to you as the researcher to code the responses from open-ended questions. So that's, so we capture the data, but we don't code the data for you when we're capturing the data. You need to do that yourself. Okay. Then the next phase that we assist with is with analysis. So we assist with during the design phase, we would assist with an analysis plan. So we want to make sure that you're going to get some useful data and a useful analysis from your study. And then we will also assist with the analysis of your project if you can't manage it yourself. So if you don't know what to do with the analysis, we can explain to you what to do and you can try and do it yourself, or we can help you do the analysis. And if you've got a particularly complex project where you're using statistics which are not sort of basic statistics, some more advanced statistics, it's usually better to have somebody with statistical knowledge helping you with that analysis. When we do statistical analysis for the researcher, we'll describe and discuss the results with feedback meetings. So when you hand in your data for analysis, there will be the project will be registered for analysis, and then it will be allocated to a consultant, and that consultant will get hold of you to arrange what we call a feedback meeting based on the results that they've got from the analysis of your project. Again, there's time involved. So we're working on multiple projects at any one time. So we don't usually deal with a project on a sort of same day basis, for example. So if you decided that you wanted to have help with your analysis and you come with your data set, don't expect to get immediate support for your project, because we have other projects in the queue which we're assisting on already before you come in. It's very rare that there won't be anything in the queue before you. Could happen, but it's not likely. And again, you need to build in that time for the time that it's going to take for somebody to help you with the analysis. Okay. And then, so our conditions of service would be that it could be 3 weeks from handing in data to having a feedback meeting. And that could be shorter or longer depending on what other work the consultant who's been allocated to your project is doing. Okay, then so UJ, if you want to do the analysis yourself, UJ has a site license for IBM SPSS software. So you could, if you want to have a go yourself, you could get the license and try and do the analysis yourself. And there is a limited number of licenses available. So if UJ runs out before the license is renewed, you might need to use software on a computer in one of the computer laboratories. So up until a certain point, we would allow the student or the researcher to install the software on their laptop. But if we run out of licenses, then that option wouldn't be available. Okay. And then during feedback sessions, the consultant will explain statistics to you, and they will also provide supporting material to help you write up your results. So we have access to certain publications that we know would be relevant for the statistical analysis that you might be doing for your project. So, for example, there's a very good book by Julie Palland called The SPSS Survival Guide. And that book has a number of chapters covering a number of different statistical procedures, for example. So, including examples of how to write up the results. So if we were giving you help with, say, a regression analysis, we would also we'd explain how the analysis has proceeded to you, and then also give you a link to a resource where it would explain to you what the regression is and how to write up that regression analysis. Okay, but then it's your responsibility as the researcher and also your supervisor to an extent to interpret the findings that you get from your analysis with the broader theoretical framework of your study. So you need to write up the result and link it to the theoretical framework that you started off with. Okay, and then the other thing, if you do make use of STATKON services, you'd be required to acknowledge the support that you've received for your thesis or your research paper from the STATKON consultants, from the consultancy. Okay, it's common sort of courtesy to acknowledge somebody that's given you assistance. And you also, there might be some instances where the consultant might actually be more involved in your project, but I'll talk about that a bit later. Okay, then when you've finished your project, you're going to write up a thesis, or you might write a paper, and you submit the thesis for examination, and you submit the paper to a journal, and then you might get feedback from the examiner or from the reviewer, which on the statistics or on the design that you've used, maybe the sampling, or maybe on the stats that you've used in the paper. And you might need to get feedback from a consultant, either who assisted with you the project or who might be able to give you some input. Even if they haven't assisted, they might be able to give you some advice on how to respond to the examiner or to the reviewer. So this is quite, sometimes reviewers are kind of, what's the word for it? I'm trying to be polite. Sometimes reviewers look at a problem from a very limited perspective. So they don't always come up with, sometimes their suggestions are very meaningful and valuable, but sometimes their suggestions are a bit off the mark, so they're not quite right about what they're suggesting. So it's good if you need to get some advice on the statistical feedback that you're getting, or on the design feedback that you're getting from a reviewer, it's probably good to get some input from a person who does lots of work with design and statistics, just to understand whether the reviewer is actually giving a good feedback or constructive feedback, or giving some feedback that doesn't actually really make sense for what you're trying to do. So that's another area where we can assist with the service. Okay, we also do workshops through RCD. So there's a few workshops that we've presented in the past, and these would probably be available. They might be run again, but they might also be available on the RCD platform. So we've done workshops on developing a theoretical proposition, on populations and sampling, on questionnaire design, on data entry, and so on. And then some statistical workshops on descriptive statistics, on reliability and exploratory factor analysis, statistics comparing groups like the t-test and ANOVA, and correlation and regression analysis. Okay, so those are some of the things which would be available either through the RCD platform, or there might be courses later on in the year. So just terms and conditions apply. So obviously our services dependent on the availability of consultants to support your project. So if we inundated with projects, it might be that we can't work on yours right away, or we might not be able to work on your project within the time frame that you need to work on it. So just bear that in mind. It might be an issue. Normally it isn't, but there could be an issue with availability of consultants. And then if you are registered, if you do register your project, we have a project form which has terms and conditions on that form. So if you do get registered into the system, the terms and conditions will come up on the forms that we share with our researchers. Okay, what we don't do is we don't act as a supervisor or as a co-supervisor for any researcher, and it's not a fixed rule, but generally we're not academic staff, so we're not in an academic department, so we don't usually act as a supervisor, as a co-supervisor. We'll give you feedback on your research, but we're not supervising your project. We don't communicate with your supervisor on your behalf, so it's up to you to keep the channel of communication open with your supervisor. So we'll communicate with them as well, but we'll also communicate with you. And then we don't do consultations via email or by the telephone. We do in-person consultations or online consultations. If there's a small query, or a small issue, then we obviously communicate with researchers via email. But it's very difficult to give feedback on a research proposal or give feedback on analysis via email or on the telephone in a sort of comprehensive way. So we usually work in person or online for the meetings, and the meetings are normally an hour to an hour and a half long. We don't design a questionnaire for you. We'll give you feedback on a questionnaire, but we won't design a questionnaire from scratch for you. It's up to you to start the process, and then we'll give you feedback on what you've started. I've already mentioned we don't collect data except through the online survey service, and that would be you kind of would be telling us who you want the online survey to go to, and you'll be managing the email lists and things. We just kind of we load the survey and we monitor it. We don't get involved in sampling and so on for that process. We don't code responses. The responses for your closed-ended questions should be coded before the survey starts. And then if you've got open-ended questions, you would need to code those responses yourself. And then obviously we don't analyze open-ended questions. We'll give you a frequency of the answers, and then you would need to decide what to do with those. And then we don't write up findings or results for you. You need to do that yourself. Okay, in terms of ethics, ethical issues related to a quantitative study can involve honesty in the field. It's very important you don't have to maintain anonymity, but it would be one of the key kind of issues that you are dealing with when you're doing a research project is the response going to be anonymous or not? And if it isn't, how are you going to manage that? Maintaining confidentiality, in other words, not sharing a person's responses with anybody else, and also not sharing your results with people that don't need it, for example, don't need to see it. You shouldn't force answers to questions. So one of the common problems with, say, Google Forms is when you set up the questionnaire, it defaults to forcing participants to answer questions. And that's a big problem with academic research, is that one of the key kind of points of ethics of research is that you shouldn't be forcing people to answer questions. They must have the choice of answering, not be forced to answer. And then you must also ensure that participation in the research is voluntary, so you don't want to go around forcing people to participate in the project. So that's also something you need to manage, which would be part of a quantitative project as well. So we don't kind of get involved in the validity of the data, in the ethics of your study, other than sort of highlighting that these are some of the things that you need to worry about. So, for example, if we think there's like with the online survey, so if a researcher tells me that they're going to be doing a Google Forms survey, and they show me the link to test, and the link has I can see from the link that they're forcing participants to answer the question, I will raise that problem with them and say, ethically, there's an issue here. You can't force people to answer questions, and they need to then deal with that. So in that sense, we will give you feedback on ethical issues, but we're not going to get too involved in the application of that. We can't because we're not directly involved in the field work. And then we don't, we assume that when you've collected data, it's going to be valid and honest and sort of accurate. If we see anything that we think are problematic, we will report that to the supervisor and the HOD of the department. So if we think there's any ethical breaches that have been made, so if we think somebody's made up data, for example, we will report that to the supervisor and the head of department. But sometimes you need to be careful with those things. So, for example, we had a case a few years back where the consultant thought the student had made up the data, but she just captured it in a funny way. So it wasn't made up. She just misunderstood how to capture the data. So it looked like it was fake data, but it actually was just the way she captured it. And there was nothing wrong with the data capturing, nothing wrong with the data collection. It was just captured incorrectly. So we're very careful about making decisions about ethical breaches. And then we also can't be responsible for you reporting the results correctly in your thesis. So we will explain the results and we'll give you resources. But if you write up the results incorrectly and send it off for examination and so on, we won't be held liable for that mistake that you've kind of made. And because we can't do the write-up for you, you would have to be responsible for that. Okay, so how do you get hold of us? STATKON, our consultations are by appointment only. So you can either telephone the STATKON line 011-559-2851, or you can email statkon@uj.ac.za. And sorry, these slides will be shared with you after the session, so you'll be able to get the information if you need to consult with STATKON. And as I mentioned, the consultations can be online or in person. We have 4 consultants. There's myself, there's Jacqueline de Klerk, Anisu Kuvitsa, and Dr. Tugor Moloye. And we are the 4 statistical consultants who provide support for the quantitative projects. Our offices are located at 20 Chislehurst Drive, which is just outside the entrance of the APK campus, entrance B. And we do have a website, but it's not... it needs some work. Okay, so it's got a little bit of information there, but it's not probably very exhaustive. The best thing to do is to contact the help desk and our help desk, our admin desk, and ask them for or email and ask if it's useful for you to get support or not. Okay, this is a picture of our house. Our house is located this is a map of the APK campus, and we located just outside the entrance between parking lot B and parking lot C. And just some summary information before I finish. It's not compulsory to consult with STATKON. If you've got a supervisor who's very skilled in quantitative research, and if you've got a very good, well-designed study where you're using pre-existing questionnaires and so on, you don't necessarily need to come to STATKON. But in most instances, it's probably a beneficial exercise to come to STATKON to get, at the beginning of your study, when you've got your proposal, to get feedback on your research project. And then, and then also if you need help with analysis, that's where we can assist as well. Appointments are on a first come, first served basis. And you need to allow for time to get access to the service because we are busy. And that's it from my side. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions, and I'll look into the chat box to see if there's anything there. So that's my end of my presentation. Let me have a look here. Okay. So do we have a freedom of choosing a preferred consultant, or must we only use the one that's allocated to us? So usually it depends on. So we try and divide projects equally amongst each of us. So the way normally what happens is a project will come through to the admin, and then they will allocate it to the consultant who's next in line for a project. So it's not necessarily that you would get the consultant that you might be looking for, but you can ask if a consultant is available. So and some people do approach consultants directly when they work with them a lot. So I have certain supervisors who approach me because I've worked with their students and we have a good relationship. So if I've got capacity, I would take those projects. So if you're supervised, it's not so much about you as this. If you're the student, it's more about your supervisor asking for a particular consultant if they've worked with that consultant. But normally what happens is, as a general rule, the projects come in and they get allocated to the next consultant on the list, kind of thing. But you can ask if a consultant is available, the one that you prefer to work with. Okay, it's a small fee for Question Pro for the student's account or faculty. So it depends on your supervisor. So if your supervisor has research funds, they might be willing to pay for you. And a lot of supervisors will have research funds, but if they don't have funds, then you might have to pay for it yourself. But if you have financial constraints, we could also look at the option of you using something like, and it depends on how complicated your questionnaire is as well. You could look at using Google Forms and setting that up and so on. Or you could look at maybe using the sort of free version of Question Pro to make sure that just making sure that it has the functionality that you need it to have. So there are ways of getting around the payment issue where you might need to do a little bit of work on your own. The one thing I would say though is, if you just based on recent experience as well, is that if you're going to do a questionnaire on your own, make sure somebody checks it for you who knows what they're doing. Because I had a case recently with a researcher who had set up a Google Forms. She wanted to originally use Google Forms, so she set it up, but didn't get anybody to check it. And then she decided it wasn't working properly, so she went to paper-based, and she got a good response from the paper-based. But she sent me the Google Forms to add to the paper. There were four or five people that had answered the online questionnaire, but she hadn't set it up properly. And there were a number of questions which didn't have useful information because of the way she'd set up the Google Forms questionnaire. She sort of flipped the questions and the response categories around the wrong way. So it didn't make any sense. The answers didn't make any sense. So you don't want to end up doing a full survey where you've got meaningless data. So if you are going to use an online survey, make sure you set it up correctly and get somebody who knows about online surveys to look at it to make sure that you're getting accurate information from the survey. Okay, even we can make mistakes. So even with Question Pro, I did a survey for a PhD student a couple of years back, and Question Pro has got quite a sophisticated system of filtering and branching, and you have to understand how the filters and branches work. And I'd put in we changed something in the questionnaire. We changed the question, and when we changed it, we changed the page that it was on. And because I changed the page, it lost the link between another question. So there was one question which wasn't answered at all on the questionnaire because the link had been broken, and I didn't see it when I was when we changed the questionnaire. I didn't see that the link had been broken. So you have to be very, very careful when you're doing online surveys to make sure that they're working properly, especially if you're using sort of battery questions or some kind of filtering system. Or branching system, because you have to be quite careful to make sure that you're getting the right result from that. But so we do the questions. Does STATKON give training for SPSS? We did have a workshop last week for that, so you just missed it. But I think that was an in-person workshop. But there should be some online videos or online workshops recorded on the RCD platform as well. So just have a look for them, and then if they're not there, then just let RCD know that you're looking for a SPSS workshop, and we can try and organize another one sometime this semester. sorry, just to say, there's also some really good stuff online for learning how to use SPSS. So if you're not getting a workshop through UJ, also have a look online because there's some very good material on there. I'm also planning on setting up it won't happen this year, but from next year, hopefully there'll be a community for quantitative research where those kinds of resources, like links to good online resources for learning how to use SPSS, for example, would be available. So we've got bits and pieces of information. We just need to set it up on a community. But then they changed to Moodle, which that was a bit of a change for us. Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
Dr. Richard, we have a comment from Thompson Dube, and it's a comment and a question, I think. It says, thanks for the presentation. I, however, prefer a qualitative research approach. Wanted to know, you mentioned that quantitative is testing a theory. Can a qualitative approach study develop a theory?
Where did you see that comment? Because I can't see it.
It's in the Q&A section.
Okay. Oh, I see it. Okay, right. So sorry, I didn't look at that. I was looking at the chat. Yes. So the you can test a theory. So it's a general kind of characteristic of quantitative research and of qualitative research that when you're doing a quantitative project, you would usually be testing a theory. And when you're doing qualitative research, you're more likely to be developing a theory from the work that you're doing. And it's to do with the kind of nature of the work. So if you're doing a qualitative project, the chances are you kind of exploring an issue that's not well understood and not well researched and not well measured. So it's not always the case. So it's not a general rule. But it's usually the case. So quantitative research usually happens when you know a lot about a particular issue. It's been well developed. There's lots of definitions. There's lots of good measurement of the phenomenon that you're looking at. And that allows you to test sort of the relationship between variables because we know what the variables are, we know how they're measured and so on. Whereas qualitative research works the other way, where the situation is not well understood or the phenomenon is not well understood, and you kind of exploring the situation in depth. And from that in-depth exploration, you would then maybe develop a theory. So usually the sequencing would be if you want to understand something which is not well understood, you would sort of use a qualitative approach to understand what's going on. And then if something is well understood and well measured and well kind of established, then you would maybe use a more quantitative approach. But it's not a sort of hard and fast rule. You can test a theory using qualitative work. You don't have to test a theory using quantitative research. You might end up developing a theory from your quantitative research. So it's not a fixed thing, but it's more likely that the one would look the one way and the other would look the other way. That makes sense. And both approaches are the reason why we have what would be called quantitative and qualitative research is that they're both necessary for looking at different situations and different contexts, because we can't just use one or the other, because they both have limitations. And the strength of the one is the limitation of the other. So they complement each other. And that's why we have mixed methods, because the mixed methods address by using both approaches, we're using the strength of each, and we're addressing the weakness of each by having the mixed methods design. But you can test the theory using qualitative work if you wanted to, and you don't have to test the theory using quantitative research. So it's not a fixed thing that you have to test the theory. I'm just saying that normally, especially when you're doing a PhD, for example, there's a sort of expectation that you would need to be contributing to the theoretical debate in the area that you're working in. And that would sort of suggest that you need to either be testing a theory or developing theory from the work that you're doing. So that's why the focus would be on, and that's why I would be sharing that paper on developing a theoretical proposition. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. There was a hand from Zandile. I have enabled your mic, Zandile. You may go ahead, unmute yourself and speak.
No, thanks, madam. No, I think Dr. Davis has just covered my concern, because I thought the STATKON was only focusing on qualitative, but he also touched to the mixed method, because that's where I want to venture. So I assume then that probably the door will also be open for students who are using the both methodologies.
Yeah, so the door is open, but mainly for your quantitative component. Okay, so yeah, so we don't really give support for the qualitative side of things. I mean, I actually had a meeting this morning with a student who's doing his PhD, and he's using a mixed methods. He's doing interviews and a questionnaire, and also some other sources of data. So I gave him some brief input on his interview schedule, but it's not something that we spend a lot of time focusing on. Our main focus would be on the questionnaire and what that's going to what information that's going to generate. So it's, and I have advised a couple of students on qualitative recently, but we've got so many projects coming in for quantitative design or mixed methods with a quantitative component that we don't really have a lot of time to focus on the qual. And then a couple of years ago, RCD did have a qualitative person that they appointed to advise, but it didn't work out very well. I think part of the problem is qualitative research is not as statistical-based research has a structure to it. So you've got data, you've got certain kinds of measurement, and there's certain kinds of statistics. I'm oversimplifying, but it's quite structured with what you need to do. With qualitative work, it's not as straightforward. Yes, there's coding, and yes, there's development of themes from codes, but it's not. You don't have the same. It's not as easy to do that, or to sort of support that kind of work, in my opinion. Anyway, it's not. Because every project is going to be different. Every interview is going to have very different kind of responses. It's not like you're working with a set of questions where you've got closed-ended responses and you can just run a frequency. It's much more complex with a qualitative project. And there's also different kinds of qualitative analysis. There isn't just one type of qualitative analysis, and each of those has processes that you need to follow, which if you're an expert in that, you might know what they are. But for me, advising on it is very. I know a little bit about qualitative research, but I'm definitely not an expert. So I know how to use Atlas to an extent, but I'm not an expert in using Atlas, for example, which is the software that we use for qualitative analysis. So I can explain how you should use it, but not how you'd not how you'd use it in a sort of sophisticated way, kind of thing. So that's and it's something that UJ probably needs to address, but I think it's quite difficult to provide the same kind of service for quant as for quant. And also, even within quant, we have limitations with what we can support in our units, because there's 4 of us. We're not expert in every single statistical procedure, so sometimes we can't help everybody. So it's so that's the issue with. So I think if you're doing a qual project, you kind of need to sort of establish what level of expertise your supervisor would have in the methods of analysis and the tools that you can use. And then if they're not experts in that, then maybe try and find somebody in the department or somebody in the faculty that could help. And that's where the starting point is. And RCD does offer they do have some workshops, I think, recorded from Atlas, for example, so that would also help. Yeah.
Doc, thank you for raising the alarm, because the time is one of the most essential matter in this endeavor. So I think
Yeah.
I've noted your point, Doc. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, so I think, okay, so you're ready for the next presentation?
Yes, thank you so much,
Okay.
Dr. Richard, for your presentation and for responding to the questions. And please allow me to apologize on behalf of the PFM because Mr. Tabiso Masango could not join us at this moment. However, I will continue to share yeah, I don't know if you can see my presentation.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so as I've mentioned, please accept our deepest apology because the PFM could not join us today. However, I would leave their contact details. So the PFM is basically the Postgraduate Fund Management, which deals with funding for postgraduate students. However, I have engaged with them, and then they did mention that they do not have any funding for pre-registered students. So we understand that these sessions are specifically dedicated to pre-registered students. So they did mention that they do not have funding at the moment for pre-registered students. So all the information that you will get from them is for preparing you for applications, for funding applications once you are fully registered. So only when you are fully registered from next year, that's when you're going to be able to apply for the funding. And also it is unfortunate that those sessions have begun in the second semester when most of the bursaries are closed, such as the NRF, which I think most of us are aware of. However, the applications for NRF are closed because you are going to get at least an opportunity to apply for next year when you are fully registered. So it means at this point in time, they are closed. The applications for NRF and most of the scholarships and bursaries are closed. So the information that you're going to get from them is basically maybe to apply next year for the coming years. So I will leave the contact details. My slides are not moving. Okay, so these are the contact people for the postgraduate fund management. You can contact Ms. Charlotte Mutinyani. She is also based in the Akanya building, the postgraduate school in APK. I'm not sure how many of you are aware or they know where the postgraduate school is, but yes, if you can look at the UJ map and maybe ask around, then you will know where our offices are if you don't know already. So this is where you will find us, the RCD, as well as the PFM. So we are both the PFM and the RCD, as well as the STATKON, both fall under the postgraduate school. So they are also based in the Akanya building, postgraduate school, and you can email Miss Charlotte Mutinyani on the email address that is displayed on your screen, or you can also contact her on the numbers that are displayed on your screen, or you can come physically on campus if you want to inquire about some of the bursaries on the scholarships that you can apply for. And also you can contact Mr. Tabiso Masango. He's also in the postgraduate school. His office is also here, and you can see the email address on the screen as well as the telephone number. So you can call them, send them an email address, or you can even come physically in our offices if you want to know more about the fundings that you can apply for. So again, please accept our deepest apology that they could not join us for today because they were supposed to give a presentation. However, it's you can still contact them. And also next year when you are fully registered, we also have workshops in the beginning of the year where the PFM actually do come and give a presentation about the fundings that are available for the year and those that you can apply for. So also, yes, once you are, enrolled in the main Moodle communities for fully registered students, you will also be able to get this information. So that is it from the PFM. I will share this contact details. Obviously, I will upload this slides, this very short slides on our Moodle community so that you can get the email addresses of the people to contact at STATKON. I will stop sharing and just to ask if there are any other questions that you would like to ask Dr. Richard. Unfortunately, we cannot answer questions that are related to PFM because we are not working in that department. But as I've mentioned, that you can always contact the people and then they will be able to give proper responses to your questions and the most correct, accurate responses to your questions. So let me see the chats if there is anything else. Yes, they do offer. If you want assistance with the NRF applications, then you can definitely do come to our offices, and then they can be able to assist you with that, with the applications. Yes, just to answer your question, they do assist, and then they will give you all the assistance that you need for you to, and all the information that you need for you to proceed with your NRF application. So are there any other questions that are directed at Dr. Richard while he's still here? Okay, we do have a question, Dr. Richard. I think this one is directed to you.
Okay, so with the Question Pro is STATKON has a license for Question Pro, but because we only have one license, only one staff member in STATKON uses the software. We don't give it to students. It's very expensive software, and it's not something that you would be able to. It would cost UJ a huge amount of money to buy many licenses for individual students. So we don't have. So within STATKON, we use a license, but only one of us uses that license and manages the online survey software. So they do have an option where you can sort of where you can get a license, but which is free, but it's not, as I mentioned, it doesn't have all the functionality of a fully licensed software license. So there's lots of things that you can't do. So Question Pro, the reason why we use that license is it's got a lot of functionality. It's a very kind of comprehensive online survey software with lots of functions, lots of bells and whistles. But the free version won't have the flexibility or the functions that we have for the paid license. So that's the difference. But if you wanted to use it on your own, you can get access to it, but understanding that you won't have access to all the functions in the free version. It's the same with SurveyMonkey as well. I think SurveyMonkey does offer a kind of trial version, which is I'm calling it the free version. It's like a trial version, which you don't pay anything for, but it doesn't have all the functionality of the paid license version. So that's the kind of limitation. UJ doesn't have a license for for Question Pro. STATKON does. We have a license, but UJ, there might be other people in UJ that have as well. But as far as I'm aware, I just know of this. I know of the one that STATKON has. There is other software that UJ has a site license for. So, for example, if you want to use SPSS, UJ has a license for that. UJ has a license for Stata, which is another stats software application used by people in the College of Business and Economics and in the Department of Economics at UJ. So there are some software applications that UJ has a sort of license for, which students can get access to. but not question pro isn't one of them at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. So, Julia, your question. If your degree is over 2 years, what is the best time to contact your department? So the sooner the better. So within your department, there will be a process that you need to follow to get your proposal into the. So usually what happens in most faculties is there'll be a higher degrees committee that meets. It's either a departmental or a faculty-based higher degrees committee, and they will meet to discuss proposals. To review proposals. So once your proposal has gone through that process, you can then, as soon as that's happened, you can contact STATKON to get an appointment, or even before then, if you've got a good proposal and your supervisor is happy with it, you can get a booking with STATKON, and you can maybe do the two at the same time. So you can get feedback from STATKON and from the High Degrees Committee at the same time. Depends on how quickly things work. Some departments, I think, are quicker than others in terms of how the process works. But the thing you're likely to experience it's likely to take longer than you anticipate to get through those committees, because after that high degrees committee, there might be an ethics committee, and they don't meet every day. They're kind of only meeting once a month, and then if you miss the deadline, it'll be the next month, and you need to get on with your work as quickly as possible. So the faster you work, the faster you're likely to get through to the process. So I'd say as quickly as possible. As quickly as reasonably possible. The sooner the better. You don't want to be in a situation where you've got 3 months to hand in your thesis and you haven't got your proposal approved. That's definitely not a good situation to be in. And then you also don't want to be in a situation where you're collecting data literally a month before you have to hand in your thesis, because that's going to put you under a lot of pressure, and it's going to, and you might not make the deadline. So the faster, you have to push in the beginning to get the work done. I'm a procrastinator, so I'm a very bad example to talk about finishing your qualification on time, because I've got 2 master's degrees and I didn't finish either of those on time, and I didn't finish my PhD on time either. So I'm a very bad example of a sort of efficient student. So you need to, and it's not a nice position to be in, to be asking for extra time to finish your qualification and so on. So you just need to work as fast as you can, and the best solution for that is to do a little bit every day on your project. So even if you're working, if you're having other problems in your life, just try and do a little bit every day on your project, and you'll get there in the end, kind of thing. So does STATKON assist pilots? Yeah, so we can do pilots, but again, it's your project. So you would have to kind of design the instrument, and then we can assist with the analysis of the pilot, but it depends. A pilot, you can get different sizes of pilot studies. So you can get it depends on what you're measuring again. You can get a big project where a pilot is a large number of responses, say 300. But you also get small pilots, would be 5 to 10 maybe responses. So it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the pilot. If you just want to get a feel for whether and just to say that you can't do much statistical analysis with a small sample. So let's say, for example, you've got a questionnaire that's measuring, making research capacity in an organization, and that questionnaire has a lot of questions on it. You can use a small pilot to get responses from people to say, do they understand the questions? Do they, comment on the length of the questionnaire, that kind of thing. So it's more of a qualitative kind of evaluation of the questionnaire to make sure that potential participants know what the questions mean, that they're not confused about any of the questions. But it's not a quantitative evaluation of the questionnaire. If you want to do a quantitative pilot, you'd need to get a much bigger sample. And the sample size would depend on what you're measuring, basically. So yeah, so it depends on the pilots can mean different. A pilot can mean different things, but you also have to remember, linking it to the previous point, how much time do you have? You can't, I'm going to use an example of a PhD student who did a project a couple of years back looking at, so his sample was businesses, small businesses, or it was businesses that were involved in trade credit. And he designed a questionnaire which was a new questionnaire, but he doesn't really have the opportunity to test the questionnaire statistically because he needed to get a big sample, and you don't have time when you're doing, well, once you've got your proposal reviewed and approved, you're kind of a year into your degree already, and then to do the field work, you don't have endless time to kind of go and collect a sample of 300 and then go and collect another sample of 300 6 months later. So because that'll kind of take a year, and then suddenly you've only got 6 months to write up and get everything finished. So if you're doing it in 3 years, so there's a kind of time limit on what you can do with a PhD or a master's or an honors degree. And you have to bear that in mind when you're thinking about the type of methods that you're going to use to kind of validate and to validate your questions, for example. So one of the things we try and recommend is to use a pre-existing questionnaire that's already been tested and validated, because that gives you a good starting point to know that yours is probably your questionnaire would be is going to work. If you have to develop the questionnaire from scratch, that means that you kind of do have to do some form of testing on it, but that might mean a big sample. And then the question is, how easy is it going to get for you to get these big samples that you need to do the testing of the questionnaire, and then to do some actual data collection later on, because you're not really supposed to use the test sample for the real sample data, if that makes sense. So you need two samples. Sometimes what people do is they'll get a very big sample, and they'll split the sample, and they'll use one half to test and one half to do the actual kind of study. But so they kind of collect the two samples at the same time, and then they split the analysis into a test. And as long as the test works, you can then use the other half of the sample to do the analysis. And then some people, what we sometimes do, which is not technically correct, is that we use the same sample to do the testing and the analysis, but that's a lot of people will kind of look down on that and say, no, you can't do that, it's not the right thing to do. So yeah. Okay, so the question of running tests, we do, yeah. So I presume what you mean by running tests is that you mean the statistical analysis. Yes, we do, yeah. So part of our service is to help with analysis. Is everyone online pre-registered? Is everyone here a pre-registration? I'm just asking a question because okay.
Yes, too.
Yeah, okay.
But just a quick one, Joe, if I may just come in, because after asking now, because I think I'm just gonna change now my strategy on my research. Then when you mention that it's important to use a questionnaire that has been used before, are you talking about the types of questions, or maybe the question that is there? Because now I don't know if you get where I come from.
So it depends on what you're measuring. So usually if you're using usually when you're measuring something when I say something, I mean some kind of variable for a study, you need to, there's a good chance that somebody else out there has already tried to define and measure it. And they might have used a questionnaire. So if you talk about something like self-esteem, for example, the concept of self-esteem, if you're working in psychology, there will be, that's been measured. It's been, everyone know, well, I'm saying everyone knows what it is. It's kind of a well-established concept. There's good definitions for it. And there will be questionnaires or instruments that measure this thing called self-esteem. So the question would be, as if you need to measure that concept for your study, are you going to develop a whole bunch of new questions because you think you've got a better idea of what self-esteem is, or are you going to use what is already out there that's been tested and validated? Because and you might be measuring different concepts which haven't been used together before. And when you do that, you'll take questions from different sources. So you might take self-esteem from this instrument, and you might take self-confidence from another instrument, and then you might take anxiety from another instrument. So you can take, they don't always have to be from the same place. They could be from different places. So this example that I'm going to share with you from Blakey is the example that they use is an environmental related example, and they take questions from different instruments to measure what they've defined for the study. So they take sort of 3 questions from here and they take 5 questions from there. So you can do that. But I think it's just this thing about there's no need to reinvent the wheel if you've got a good wheel already. That's the point. If there's nothing been done or not much done in the area that you're working in, it might be difficult to find something, and then you might need to develop your own questionnaire. And then obviously the context that you're working in will determine some of the questions that you need to ask. So it might be that if the work hasn't been done in that context before, then you won't use that questionnaire. Wow. But I mean, so sometimes what people do is if you're doing a master's project, for example, the master's student might be replicating a study that's been done in another country, for example, with a different group of people. So recently I've just put in a questionnaire online for a student who's looking at research capacity amongst a group of people in the health professions. And she's kind of replicating a study that was done in Australia, I think, or another country, where they did a similar kind of thing, looking at research capacity in that country for a different group of people. So there's no need to kind of they've got a perfectly good questionnaire that they use for that study, measuring research capacity. So why do you need to create a new questionnaire when there's a good one that's been used already? So that's the kind of thing. So she's kind of just taken their questionnaire and made a few tweaks to it and is going to use the same instrument. Wow. And there are advantages to doing that as well, because when you come to doing the analysis, you're not working with something new, you're working with something established. So you can compare your results to what other people have got and say, okay, well, is it good or bad, or is it the same or is it different? And that also tells you something about what's going on. Sometimes you have to do something new. And sometimes you have to. So, for example, I'm also currently working on a project for a PhD student who's looking at attitudes of people working in the hospitality industry towards transformation in their sector. And there's not much been done on that. And to kind of identify what the important kind of factors are influencing people's decision making, that researcher had to kind of come up with a new set of questions which haven't been used before, because that hasn't been done before. So sometimes you might need to develop your own instrument. Sometimes you might be able to use a pre-existing instrument, or wow, part of a pre-existing instrument. Yeah.
That was so clear, Doc. Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Richard. Any other question that we have for Dr. Richard?
UJ Moodle account.
Okay, I do not see anybody.
There's a question for you in the Koketso in the Q&A.
Okay, let me check.
It's about do pre-registered students have Moodle accounts? I'm not sure about that.
Okay, can I please confirm with you, Ms. Dube, are you enrolled in our module communities? Can you see our module community? Let me unmute you. Let me enable your mic so that we can have a conversation. You are supposed to be enrolled in our module community and you will be able to access everything from there. And do you have access to our module community? I have enabled your mic. You can speak. Okay, so what you can do for now, because I have enabled your mic, you just need to unmute yourself and then speak. But I'll also suggest that you send me your student number. You can send the student number to your the RCD inquiries, so that I can check you in the Moodle community, and then I can be able to enroll you if you are not enrolled as yet. So in the email, please just give me your student number.
Okay. So just to Wisang, your question about consulting, you can contact STATKON for general inquiries. And then once you've been allocated to a consultant, you would normally work with that consultant. Unless there's in the unlikely event that there's a problem between you and the consultant, then there might be a reallocation. But usually it would be once you've been allocated, you normally work with that consultant for the rest of the project for the duration, unless there's a problem. Okay. And then for general queries, you could just contact the not related to your project, but related to STATKON functions. You can contact the admin number. Okay. So, Koketso, I'm going to share those resources with you. Can how will you be able to share them with the participants?
Yes, please, Dr. Richard. I appreciate that. I will share it with everyone.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. So I think we can end now. Yeah. So I'm going to disappear. Yes. Thanks very much. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good luck with your journey, your research journey. I hope you all have excellent journeys and rewarding journeys. Okay.
Let me take this opportunity, Dr. Richards, to thank you for honoring our invitation and for your very detailed presentation. And we got more information about the STATKON, and the students also know where to go to and who to contact when they need assistance with their data. Thank you for that. And thank you also to all those who have attended. Mr. Dube, I don't know if you can still hear me, or you can unmute yourself and speak at this moment. However, yes, you should have access to the Moodle community, and you do have a UJ Moodle account if you are pre-registered, so you should be able to log on and access our Moodle community. So if you cannot do that, please send an email with your student number so that we can ensure that you are enrolled and you won't have a problem when you have to do the registrations. And with that, please can I remind everyone to complete the feedback survey. I'm going to post it for the last time on the chat. So please, before you leave, can we kindly ask that you complete the feedback survey? Thank you, Dr. Richard. And if there are no more questions, then we can end our session today.
Thanks very
And
much,
thank you
everybody.
also to the
Thank you.
Thank you also to the attendees for taking your time to attend this session. We really appreciate your attendance and for showing interest in the sessions that we give you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.